Handheld gaming has been moving in a pretty predictable direction lately. Bigger screens, more power, and unfortunately, higher prices. And yet somehow, one of the most talked about handhelds of the year went in a completely different direction.
AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
The AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
The AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
AYN Thor.
The Conquer Pocket, no, the AYN Thor. A device that screams one of these things is not like the other, which left me with a pretty simple question. What am I missing? For the past few months, the AYN Thor has been the one handheld that you buds have asked me to cover more than any other. I mean, constantly. So first off, I know, I am horribly late. And if I'm being honest, I've actually had this thing for like 2 months. But hey, perhaps all it took was a little convincing and a Steam Deck price increase. But what I couldn't quite figure out was why this particular handheld was the one everyone seemed to be raving about. Android handhelds are already pretty niche. A dual screen Android handheld is even more niche. And yet here we are. You see people recommending the Thor all over YouTube and Reddit, and not just saying it's good either. People are calling it their Endgame handheld, like they've finally found the one. So that's what I wanted to take time to understand. And after spending way too much time setting mine up and playing it, I have some thoughts. I don't know about you buds, but whenever I travel, I somehow convince myself I need every piece of tech that I own. Just last week, I went to too many games. Between 3 handhelds, my camera, my iPad, and my phone, something always needs a charge. That's where the Shargeek 170 has been coming in handy. It's got a 24,000 milliamp hour battery, puts out up to 170 watts, and can fast charge up to 3 devices at the same time, so I can top off something like the Thor, my Steam Deck, and even my iPad without having to play musical chargers or something. It also supports up to 140 watt USB-C input, so when it finally does run out, you can get it from 0 to 50% in about 20 minutes. Not too shabby. I also think the little display on the front is sick. It tells me exactly what's charging, how much power everything's pulling, and how much battery is left. And lastly, it's airline safe, so you don't have to worry about any awkward conversations at airport security.
Those are just mints.
It says curiously strong. That's dangerous.
If you're looking for a solid power bank for travel, handheld gaming, or just carrying around way too much tech like I apparently do, I'll have links for the Shargeek 170 down below. Huge thanks to Sharge for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about the Thor. So the first thing that stands out about the Thor clearly is where it draws its inspiration. It's a dual screen clamshell handheld, and if you grew up with a DS or 3DS, there's basically no way that you're not making that connection immediately. And I think that maybe that's why I was interested in it to begin with, because growing up I was very much a DS and 3DS kid. Back in 2005, I was working at GameStop and I got the Mario Kart DS bundle. Eventually I traded that in for a launch DS Lite, traded that in for a launch 3DS, and traded that in for the 3DS XL. Today, I have none of them. Anyway, seeing the Thor for the first time felt like someone was finally making the version of this form factor that I've been wanting to revisit for years, especially when it comes to DS and 3DS emulation. I can emulate those systems on other devices, but I've never liked playing those systems on said devices. Whether one screen is tiny, both screens are side by side, or you're constantly swapping between them, you know, it works technically, but it just doesn't feel right. I tried on the Steam Deck and I think it lasted for like 5 minutes before I was like, oh hell no! So the Thor fixes all of that just by being what it is. Now, it's not a perfect recreation of the original hardware, but it's pretty damn close. Let's talk about the good stuff. The Thor comes in 4 configurations: Lite, Base, Pro, and Max, with the highest configuration offering 2 storage options. I opted for the Pro model with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, 12GB of RAM, and 256GB of storage. It's got dual OLED displays, Hall effect sticks and triggers, a tiny little fan in there doing its darndest, and a 7,000 milliamp hour battery. But the displays are really the whole point here. The top screen is a 6-inch 1080p AMOLED panel running at 120Hz, and the bottom screen is a smaller 3.92-inch AMOLED touch display running at 60Hz, and they are bright and beautiful. I think it's also worth noting that having this second screen is useful for more than just gaming. Hitting the AYN button brings up system performance, so you can keep an eye on temperature, fan speed, performance modes, frame rate, all this other system level control stuff without fully leaving what you're doing. But it also goes a little further than that. You can use the bottom screen for guides, music, or watching your favorite YouTube channel.
How neat is that?
I've been using an app called Pixel Guide, which lets you download guides from places like GameFAQs for offline use, and younger me would have lost his mind over this. Having a game on the top screen and a guide on the bottom screen feels like the, modern equivalent of sitting in front of a TV with a strategy guide next to you. Back when games were physical. But that's another topic for another video. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 punches way above its weight class. It might not be the newest flagship chip anymore, but for retro gaming and light PC emulation, it gives the Thor a lot of legroom. And I'll get into the performance of that in the next section. As far as the build quality, I think it's stellar. This thing feels very solid and truthfully has a bit of weight to it. The shell feels nice and sturdy, the hinge has like a nice amount of resistance, and the whole thing opens and closes very nicely. It doesn't feel flimsy, though I have seen nightmare stories online about hinge issues, and because a DS-like device kind of lives or dies by the hinge, I do feel like I'm consciously aware of how delicate I am with it every time I open it. Either way, novelty only gets you so far. The actual hardware has to still feel good. And thankfully for me, it does. Now, one thing I kept seeing online while looking into the Thor was how many people were buying grips for it, but for me, I never really felt like I needed one. I played on this thing for hours and comfort was never really an issue. It took me right back to the 3DS XL days. I know it's flat and squared off and, not entirely the most ergonomic device, but, I think that's kind of the point. The whole benefit of a clamshell design is that it can close up into something compact and protective, and I think adding a big grip to it takes away some of what makes it appealing in the first place, in my opinion. This is a device I can throw into a fanny pack or slip in my pocket. Shout out to my skinny jean brothers. The controls are also very good. The buttons are small, responsive, and kind of clicky. They remind me a lot of the buttons on the Retroid Pocket 6, actually, and I'm not going to claim they literally have the same buttons because I have no way of proving that, but they feel extremely similar, like literally the same kind of size, same kind of click, same general response. Hell, they even look the same. The sticks feel great, albeit not ideal for something that requires twin sticks like a shooter. I think they're a touch too short for that. The triggers are responsive with just enough resistance, and the D-pad feels like it was designed by somebody who has actually moved diagonally in a video game. Now, I do have a couple of complaints about the hardware though, and the first one is this little raised section right around the AYN button. Now, I'm assuming it's there to keep the display from resting directly against the buttons and joysticks when the lid is closed, but I think I would have preferred something a little bit closer to what the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 does. The screen kind of sits inside of more of a raised lip around the edge of the display, and that allows the bottom half to be truly flat. With the Thor closed, I'm always a little too aware that the left and right sides of the display can press down more than I'd like if I'm not careful. I don't know that it's actually a problem, and I'm not saying that the Thor is gonna snap in half if you look at it the wrong way, but it's just one of those tiny things that is always on my mind. So when I travel with it, I usually just leave the included black insert inside the device. My other tiny little nitpick is the placement of the volume button. It's located along the bottom next to the USB-C port, the power button, the headphone jack, and the SD card slot. And it works, but I just don't love it. I would much rather have the volume buttons along the side where I could quickly adjust them without changing my grip or feeling around the bottom of the device. It's one of those small quality of life things that the Retroid Pocket Flip 2 again gets right, and after using both, I think I prefer that approach. But outside of those two little things, I really enjoy the hardware. It feels like AYN took an old idea and modernized it. But as much as I like the hardware, that's not really where my opinion of the Thor gets fuzzy. So let me preface this by saying that the software experience on the Thor is excellent, but it depends heavily on how much you're willing to put into it. I initially planned to use Emulation Station as my front end since it's kind of my go-to lately, but for the Thor, I decided on Cocoon instead. It's better suited for the dual screens, and I noticed others having success with it. And for the most part, I dig it. Cocoon gives you a lot more control over how the Thor looks and behaves, and when it's set up nicely, it gets very close to that DS-style experience. Starting with 3DS emulation, A Link Between Worlds ran smoothly, aside from a few occasional graphical glitches. I managed to play it at 4x resolution and a smooth 60 frames per second. The visuals are sharp, vibrant, and I think they perfectly showcase what this device can do. Mario Kart 7, New Super Mario Bros. 2, Ridge Racer 3D, and Star Fox 64 3D all performed brilliantly. DS emulation was even more straightforward. I tested games like Hotel Dusk, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, The World Ends With You, and Contra 4. And this honestly is where the Thor feels perfect. Hotel Dusk especially hit me right in the nostalgia feels. I completely forgot all about that game, and because of the inherent book-like nature of the game, it can really only be properly enjoyed on a device like this, unless you have an actual DS. So in general, this is easily the best modern way I've played DS and 3DS games. Now outside of DS and 3DS, performance on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is pretty much exactly what I would expect, which is to say, very good. PS1, SNES, Game Boy Advance, and all of the usual RetroArch systems were basically a non-issue. PSP was great too. I revisited a few games that all ran well as Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, and it ran beautifully at 4X resolution. GameCube and PS2 also performed really well in my testing. I was running GameCube games like Tales of Symphonia at 4X resolution in Dolphin, and SSX Tricky on PS2 ran as well as expected, despite me completely forgetting how to play the game. Wii U was a little more mixed, but still impressive depending on the game. Wind Waker HD looked beautiful, it ran at a stable 30 frames per second. Super Mario 3D World also looked great and ran well. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, was not a terrible experience, but it also wasn't like thoroughly enjoyable for me either. Even with FPS mods and high performance mode, I was bouncing between 10 and 30 frames per second. Moving on to PC emulation, I use GameNative, and I was pleasantly surprised here. It's a very weird juxtaposition seeing AAA games running on a device that looks like it should be playing Brain Age. Tomb Raider ran great, Batman Arkham Asylum and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit both maintained 60 frames per second, and all the usual indie hits like Mega Bonk, Dead Cells, and my beloved Sectori played remarkably well. Now, I wouldn't buy the Thor expecting it to replace something like the Steam Deck, and I wouldn't assume that every PC game is going to run well on this at all, but for older PC games, especially stuff from that 360, PS3 era, and a lot of indie games, GameNative adds this whole other layer of possibility to a device that already does so much. It's also probably now my ideal Persona 4 Golden device. I usually play Persona games with a guide nearby to loosely keep track of calendar days, so having the game on the top screen and a guide on the bottom while maintaining solid performance is pretty much perfect. Now, as much as I love what the Thor can do, I don't want to make it sound like this is a seamless experience. This is still an Android device, and that comes along with my favorite word, friction. Cocoon is a good example. I spent way longer than I want to admit messing with layouts, hero images, themes, scrubbing artwork, and a dozen tiny little decisions that nobody but me would ever notice. Now, to be clear, that's not entirely Cocoon's fault, and that's not even really the Thor's fault either. That's more just me wanting an experience that truthfully was what sold me on the device in the first place. I like tinkering most of the time, but ultimately,
Ain't nobody got time for that.
the end goal is to play games on it. But if you like customization, I don't think it gets any better than Cocoon, and there's a new version dropping in a couple days that should bring some UI improvements and some performance updates and some new features, and I'm very much looking forward to trying that out. Now, the biggest frustration for me was Azahar. Getting some games to behave properly often meant digging through graphic settings, shader options, and menus that, to a normal person like me, make very little sense without constant Googling. Strange red line across the middle of Ridge Racer 3D? It's because it doesn't like being any higher than 2x resolution. Silly me, of course. And since Azahar doesn't let you save these configurations on a per-game basis, I found myself taking notes. And just like Cocoon, this isn't the Thor's fault. 3DS emulation at this point in time isn't perfect, but Azahar is kind of one of the major players in that space, and that inherently puts a damper on that plug-and-play 3DS experience that a dual-screen handheld is kind of positioning. Now, once you've got it dialed in, it's usually great, but it does take effort and can be quite a scary barrier of entry for the average gamer. Lastly, if I'm playing a single screen game and using the bottom display for a guide or anything else, that bottom screen is sitting basically flush with the controls. And because of that, my thumbs would sometimes accidentally brush against it while I was using the D-pad or the right stick. So for a split second, the Thor actually gives control priority to the bottom display, and the game up top stops responding until you tap back into it. Now, in slower games like an RPG, this isn't a huge deal. But it's something like Street Fighter or fighting games, which, I'd suck at anyway, that split second matters. Now, this is a non-issue if you just turn the bottom screen off, but if you're using both screens, it's something I noticed more than I would have liked to. Now again, all of this is just my experience, and depending on how you end up using yours, or if you already own one, or should you end up getting one, your mileage may vary. And as somebody who makes videos for the internet, there's always slight hesitation to say something negative about something that is wildly popular and beloved. You're always going to end up pissing somebody off who's going to attack you in the comments and act like you took a dump on their lawn. But I just want to be transparent and honest and set realistic expectations for, people who are not as well versed in this type of stuff and is seeing this recommended all over the internet. So all in all, the Thor can do a lot, and most of what I tested ran very well, but performance isn't really the concern here. I think what stuck with me more was how much patience the experience asks from you before everything fully clicks. Which brings me back to the word people keep using for this thing: Endgame. I see the word endgame get thrown around a lot in Thor discussions online, and I think that can mean a lot of different things depending on what someone wants out of their device. For some people, it means power, and for others, simplicity. The one device to rule them all. For a device like the Thor, I think it means something a little more specific. It means you've been waiting for a modern dual-screen handheld that makes DS and 3DS games feel at home, but you also want enough power to do a lot more than that. And for that person, I get it. If you like tinkering and setting up front ends, dialing in emulators, have a love for dual-screen games, and don't really plan on playing anything beyond the 360 era, this might be it. Now, if you want to just load up emulators and use it as a standard Android device, go for it. There is nothing wrong with that. But if you want something closer to a true 3DS experience like you see in all those YouTube thumbnails, you have to be willing to meet it halfway. For me, I don't think it replaces everything I own, and I don't really think I want it to. It just needs to do its specific thing well, and it does. It's genuinely the most unique and interesting handheld I've ever used. It might not be my endgame device, but it lets me revisit games from all of the clamshells I no longer have. And for me, that's more than enough.